Welcome to the SaleAway podcast. My name is Trey, and today I'm joined with Jake and Zach, who are both co-founders and brokers as well. If you're an online business owner or an aspiring online business owner, this is the podcast for you. This episode will be part 9 of our 10-part series, How to Sell an Online Business. It is important to follow this series step by step so you can successfully sell your online business. If you haven't listened to part 1 through 8 of this series, make sure to go back and give it a listen before moving to part 9. All right, so in this episode, we're going to be giving you just a brief recap of what we've already gone over episode 1 through 8. This is a summary of the whole series, but we do highly recommend going back and listening to all of the individual episodes just because we do go into a lot more detail than we will in this episode. So we'll go ahead and jump right in with episode 1 being when should you sell your online business? And here we really highlighted things for personal reasons that you would want to sell. Some of those would be spending more time with your family, traveling the world, maybe even retiring. And some economic reasons for selling would be the opportunity to sell and reinvest in a new venture if that's something that you were thinking of doing. On here, we also discussed the valuation of websites. Generally, what we do see is a 1 to 3 times multiple, but a lot goes into determining where your business falls in that range. So there may be some outliers, outside of that 3 range to 4 or 5, depending on what that secret sauce of that business is. Is it very unique to that niche? What's the brand value? Or something really big nowadays is time spent on your business on a weekly basis. So let's say, for example, you're spending 5 hours a week maintaining a great profit versus spending 60 hours on a business. The investor is really going to be looking at that 5 hour just because it's a lot less time for them and just really investing more money into more businesses. The next one we really highlight here is competition and barriers of entry. Just really risk is a big thing on that. And then monetization methods does affect the valuation of your website. So for example, if you're an e-commerce, Amazon FBA, affiliate, or a SaaS business, that does range for your multiples there. So really what we talk about at the end of episode 1 is just, is it the right time to sell? Does it make sense to you, the multiple that you've gotten, that money that you will be getting when you do sell the business? Does it make sense for your goals that you had at the end? And once you've determined if it is the right time to sell, then it's definitely time to prepare your financial statements to take your business to the market.
All right. So podcast 2 was discussing the importance of those financial statements. And really what we touched on there was primarily the profit and loss or income statement. And that is the most important financial statement for an online business. We went into discussing a little bit about how you want to have at least 2 years of financials as long as a business has been around for longer than 2 years, which in most cases it probably was by the time you're looking to sell. But you want to really have that 2 years minimum. Having more data going further back, even 5 years, can't hurt at all. Certainly the more the better in that situation. And additionally, it's really important that those financials are tracked on a monthly basis and not annual. We gave a great example of a business that we worked with the seller on. They had great financials. They were very professional, but they just weren't monthly financials. They were done annually. That created a few problems. So again, just can't stress the importance of that enough, having 2+ years of monthly financial statements or monthly income statements. We also discussed briefly discussed a few scenarios in which you may want to be keeping a record and possibly provide to potential buyers the balance sheet and statement of cash flows. These are less common for a lot of digital assets or online businesses, and they're really not going to come up all that often. However, there are a few situations in which it is important to actually have a balance sheet or a statement of cash flows. Few examples we went to there just really briefly. If you have heavy assets or liabilities of the business, and with the cash flow statement, it may be important where cash flows and profits are drastically different. So for example, 300K net profit, but maybe 300,000 of that net profit, or sorry, 200 of that 300,000 went back into buying new inventory. And so that may be a point where you want to be providing that statement of cash flows. Um, Once again, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but this is something that we really can't stress the importance of enough, is just having these detailed financial statements. And additionally, having the supporting documentation to actually tie any sales, revenue, expenses, etc., back into the profit and loss statement. Um, so now that you have determined it's the right time to sell, you've got your financials in order, you know that's all prepared and ready to go, it's time to consider part of how you're actually going to take that to the market. Are you going to work with a broker or list that business on a marketplace?
All right, so Zach referenced there's really two options when it comes to selling your online business, and that's selling it with an online business broker or selling it through a marketplace. And when I say selling it through a marketplace, that's synonymous to selling it by yourself or doing a more so for sale by owner type transaction. And so kind of speaking on those two in more depth, if you are going to choose a broker, I would absolutely recommend choosing one that focuses on online business models specifically. A lot of traditional business brokers or investment banks don't have the buyer base and aren't familiar enough with online business models to be able to successfully sell them. And so if you do choose an online broker, a couple highlights or benefits that you're going to get is you're going to get a detailed investment presentation that's going to be put together. And that's drastically going to reduce the amount of questions that you have to answer, the amount of additional information that you're going to have to provide, because of all of it's going to be in one document that's going to be handed to a potential buyer that hopefully has everything that they need. Additionally, you're going to be able to tap into the broker's buyer base. Brokers usually have highly vetted and deep buyer bases of people that have lots of liquidity and cash on hand that are looking to put it to work through acquisitions. And they also are a lot more familiar with and understand the complexity of transactions. So especially once you get into the six-figure plus price range, there are a lot of different structures that can come into play, such as seller financing, earnouts, even something like an SBA loan. But in addition to that, things become difficult when it comes to transferring assets and transferring payment accounts and things of that nature when you're talking about some larger complex businesses. And so it's always nice to have someone there who's been through this 100 times, that knows what they're doing, that can help guide you along the way. And additionally, they'll help set up escrow, make sure the transaction is done in the safest way possible, and they can help you at least get a kind of head start on legal documentation by providing you some form documents. Now, the alternative is selling with a marketplace or selling it by yourself. This, compared to selling it with a broker, is very hands-on, requires a lot of time and effort on your part, usually because a single buyer isn't going to put together an investment presentation for their own business. You're going to be stuck answering questions of, from 100 different people who reach out that are interested in the business model. So you're not getting that investment presentation. You're not getting any help finding the right buyers, and verifying and vetting that they are true and not just trying to steal your business model. Then you also get help, or you're not going to get help negotiating or helping close and transfer the transaction. And so overall, it's a lot more work, more work for you as the seller, and it's a little bit more difficult to get through if you're not familiar with M&A transactions or online business transactions. But with that being said, it is significantly cheaper. When you think about selling with a broker, you're probably somewhere in the 8 to 15% price range. Whereas when you're selling on a marketplace, a lot of times, you're probably closer to the 5 to 10% range. And that's just because the marketplace doesn't provide you any value other than potentially connecting you with buyers. And so lots of considerations there. A lot of times it comes down to, are you willing to pay 10, 12, or 15% to find a broker? But brokers do typically get you higher valuation multiples. Our recommendation is anything that's six figures should go to an online business broker, but there's obviously exceptions if you know what you're doing. So once I guess from here, with episode 4, we took it in the route of, if you're going to do this on your own, we're trying to provide tips and our experience to help you be able to run a process by yourself. And so with number 4, we talked about how to build an investment presentation yourself.
When it does come down to building an investment presentation on your own, this again does take quite a bit of time. On the broker's end, we would say it probably averages 20 to 40 hours alone just to make, that professional looking investment presentation that you want to present to a buyer. On here, I'm not really going to go in depth on the presentation layout components themselves, but I'll say usually what we see in those. What we also have is we do have a blog specifically for episode 4. And so on there, we actually do have some screenshots of our slide decks that we have done previously. So highly recommend going over there and looking over there. But what you typically want an investment presentation to be is aesthetically pleasing, well organized, professional. Like I said, it's going to potential buyers, so you want your business to look the best to your buyer or to the buyers. You want it to be detailed, but obviously not too detailed, because you don't want to give away your business model and have a potential buyer go and take away your market share. And you definitely want the right information. Obviously, you want to give potential buyers specifically what they are looking for. So in the investment presentation, the way we generally lay it out is these 7 segments. And like I said, this is on our blog. You can go in depth on those on there. So number 1 would be the executive summary. Number 2 would be the traffic statistics. 3, financials. 4, how the revenue is generated. 5, the day-to-day operations. 6, the business level statistics. And 7, we usually wrap it up with a question and answers list. And so once this is really all complete from 1 to 4, the next the next step is to take the business to the market.
All right, so that leads us into episode 5, which was how to market your business and reach potential buyers. So in this episode, we really broke down, or in general, we kind of break down buyers into 3 different categories. They're kind of general and broad, but these would be your individuals and partners. So we kind of consider that one category. This would just be, say, me going out and buying a business as an individual, or all 3 of us in here pooling together our money, Jake, Trey, and I, going out and finding a business together. We would consider that individual or partner buyers. And then we've got competitors, direct and indirect. I just want to add one note in there. When we talk about competitors, we really want to think about them in a very broad sense, to the point where there may be competitors interested in buying the business, who don't seem like competitors up front. Maybe you've hardly ever come across them, but they might be in a similar industry. For example, they may be in the automotive industry selling Chevy parts, and maybe your business is related to Ford. And that could still be a good opportunity. Maybe that other website or that other company was thinking, hey, let's start expanding into more cars, and your website may be the perfect opportunity for them to do exactly that. And you could even be more broad than that. Just wanted to throw that note in there. We do go into that more in the actual episode 5 podcast as well. And finally, the third type of buyer we have are private equity firms, and there's really a lot more of them entering the space on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So that's a really growing piece, a growing opportunity, especially for higher dollar websites to sell to PE firms. Going off that, then we kind of break it down into a few different categories for the size of the online business in question. Smaller websites, thinking under roughly $400,000 valuation, somewhere in that ballpark, you're mostly going to be looking to pitch your business to individuals and competitors. And moving up into mid-size websites, 400K to roughly 1 million valuation, you're going to be kind of pitching to a balance of individuals, competitors, PE firms, Just a few extra notes there. It's definitely a more limited buyer base. The higher the value goes up, the fewer individuals you're going to have that can actually afford a $600,000-700,000 business. And even if they can afford it, they may just not want to put all of their eggs in one basket, or too much into one company. So the individual buyer base gets extremely limited as we get up to those very high dollar websites. Tying that back in, actually, that is where working with a broker does have a big benefit with some of those websites, is it could be tough on your own to go out and find an individual who can afford that. But oftentimes brokers are working with extremely experienced online business buyers, extremely experienced people that have been in the industry and own websites for quite some time. Um, and then finally, moving on to these larger $1 million plus websites, you're mostly going to be pitching to competitors and PE firms. Again, just so few individuals with that kind of liquid cash or money to make that type of investment. Um, and PE firms at that $1 million valuation, you're really starting to enter the sweet spot of where they're starting to looking to buy out companies. So anything 1 million and up, look to PE firms and competitors. Um, and now that you've kind of got a general idea of who you're looking to pitch your business to primarily, we're going to move on to the next piece, which is considering a few common buyer financing structures.
As I mentioned earlier, as we get into some of these higher price 6-figure and especially 7-figure online businesses, we tend to see some unique financing structures come out. One of them that I did mention previously is an SBA loan. I'm going to go over that very briefly right now because for a seller, an SBA loan is great. The buyer gets money from a government entity and then you ultimately receive all of it in cash up front. And so there's some considerations there, but it's a relatively simple model, and you don't have to be super involved in it as a seller. The two models or two structures that I do want to discuss in more depth is one, seller financing, and two, earnouts. And so seller financing is a structure that a buyer is going to use to where they're going to offer you a guaranteed amount of money paid out over a specific period of time. And so buyers will use this to reduce the amount of upfront cash they have to use to purchase the business. And then what they'll do is take the profit that the business is making to help pay for those monthly payments that they're paying back to you. And so if we just think simply a $500,000 business, you're going to get $400K cash up front, and then $100K of cash would be seller financed over, call it I'm going to say a 10-month period of time for math's sake. You'd end up getting a monthly payment of $10,000 per month for the next 10 months. And so it's a guarantee to be paid a specific amount of money at a future time period. Earnouts, on the other hand, are more so incentive or performance based, to where you are not guaranteed, but you have the potential to earn a certain amount of money if your business hits specific performance targets. And so a lot of that is going to be, a lot of times you'll see it tied to profitability. And so a buyer wants to know that once he buys a business, there's not going to be some drastic changes, or that he's not buying into a falling knife scenario. And so what they'll do is put an earnout on it, to where if the business maintains a certain level of profitability over the next 12 months or maybe 24 months, you get paid out certain portion or pre-agreed upon amount of money. And so two kind of unique structures, but buyers tend to use these on higher priced businesses because it allows them to really punch above their weight class and buy a bigger business than they would otherwise be able to buy, because they're able to put less cash down up front. And so there's plenty of considerations to each of these, and we talk specifically about what the considerations are and what you should do to safely protect yourself if you get an offer that includes one of these, because they're inherently risky. Both of them are. And so podcast number 6 talks a lot about what the risks are and how you can structure around those risks to make it safe for you.
In episode 7 of this series, we went over the due diligence process. If you are unaware what due diligence is, it's the process of examining the details of the transaction to ensure it is legal and to fully apprise both the buyer and the seller of as many facts of the deal as possible. So generally what we see is an LOI being signed, and the buyer will then go into the due diligence process. So generally what we see is buyers will look to verify the following information. That'll be your financial information, the legal information, and the operational information. So in episode 7, we do actually dive deep into these and go in more detail, but I'll be kind of on a surface level of what they may be looking at. So for financials, they will be analyzing and verifying the financial statements. They'll be analyzing business level statistics. And then in legal, the legal component, they will be looking into leases. If you're a brick and mortar location, this is important there, or distribution centers or a warehouse. They can be looking into purchase agreements or distribution agreements. This could include also supplier relationships. This could include trademarks, copyrights, and patents, articles of incorporation, and business registration documents. And then the last one is going to be the operational information. This is where buyers are going to go in depth on the day-to-day operations of the business. And this is pretty much when you will provide back-end access to analytics, Shopify. In this episode, we do go into being extremely cautious when you are giving this back-end access to the buyers. Obviously, don't give them full back-end access, just give them view-only access. And on here, they'll also verify the social media accounts. They'll go through part-time employees if you have virtual assistant, any part-time employees, and then also the marketing or SEO strategies that you have going on there. Something important to state here is due diligence can really vary from buyer to buyer or even business to business. So just give as much information as the buyer is asking for. Don't go above and beyond before all of those documents are signed and completed. On here, buyers will likely also spend time researching competitors on their own and also barriers of entry. But once that due diligence process really gets wrapped up, this is when the legal documentation and escrow start to form.
If you didn't already have a lawyer or hire a lawyer earlier to review your LOI, at this stage, you're going to hire a lawyer. Do not reach out to me and ask me to look through your legal documentations and let you know if you're safe. That requires a legal opinion from a trained lawyer. And so a broker is here to help you throughout the legal documentation phase. They can provide you with form documentations and a starting point. But most brokers, I'm not sure if there are any that are also lawyers, but brokers are brokers, not lawyers. And so this is where you want to have a lawyer looking through your documentation to make sure that you're structuring a legal and safe transaction for you. And I will say this is also more important the bigger the size of the deal. If it's a $5,000 website, you can probably skirt around by signing a basic purchase agreement by yourself. But anyway, so once you get past the due diligence phase, the next step is going to be setting up and funding an escrow account. And so an escrow is a third-party service where money is going to be held while all of the transfer of assets take place. And so escrow.com is a popular one. You'll want to set up an escrow.com. An agent from escrow.com will act as the overseer of the account. The buyer's going to deposit money into it. When the money is sitting in the account, you're going to transfer all of the assets of the business to the buyer. And once all of the assets have been transferred, the money is going to be released from that escrow account to you, to the seller's account. And so step one, before you start transferring any assets or spending any money drafting legal documents, you want to go ahead and make sure that the money is in escrow. And you also want to verify that the potential buyer has this money before you sign an LOI, because you don't want to get to the funding stage and then have them say, oh, wait, I don't have the money yet, but it's coming, or something along those lines. So once the money's in escrow, you're going to start putting together your legal documentation. The most important document here is the purchase agreement, and that essentially is what binds the transaction. It states all of the assets that you're buying and the consideration that you're giving them for those assets. There's some other documentation that might need to be done. So if there's patents or copyrights, trademarks, those will need to be transferred. And then if you have seller financing or earnouts, you'll need to, if it's seller financing, you'll want to have a separate seller note. If it's earnouts, you can usually bake that language into the purchase agreement. But if you do have those, legal documentation will be more complex. Step 3, once you've got these legal documents drafted, you've got them agreed upon, you want to go ahead and start transferring assets. I do want to specify that you want to make sure your legal documents are agreed upon before you start transferring assets. You do not want to transfer assets and then end up in a legal dispute to where the deal's not going to take place or a deal's not going to get done, but you already gave the dude the domain name and the website and you have no way of getting it back. And so make sure all of the legal documents are done before you start transferring all of the assets. And then after that, really the only responsibility for the seller is to provide some degree of post-transaction support. Usually there's going to be a 7 to 10 day window after the business is transferred to actually have the funds released. And so that's a 7 to 10 day window to make sure that the buyer is getting, or everything that the buyer got is what they paid for, and everything that you said was true was true. And so the money will sit in there for a grace period and then it'll be released. But usually after that, it's typically common to see a seller sticking around for usually a month and on a limited basis, not 40 hours a week, maybe 5 or 10 hours a week to help with the transition. So with that number 8 leads into number 9 where we are here. And so I thought it, might make sense to open up the floor and see if any of us here want to, share any tidbits that we might not have discussed on this or any of the previous episodes, or maybe talk about, some things we've learned through some of the transactions we've gone through.
So I've got a quick thing, and I don't know if this ties into what you were saying. I just kind of wanted to come out randomly say this and say, holy crap, after putting together the summary and going through this, I think it's been a long time, if ever, since we've all kind of stepped back and look at every step of the way just kind of in one sitting. Usually it's just kind of one of those things working on any deals where you just hit the ground running and kind of start working through it one step or a few steps at a time. And just looking back on it, it is quite a bit more work. And when you dive in, it's really not as bad as it sounds. However, after going through that summary, and again, that wasn't even very in-depth. I think it ended up being a lot longer than we intended it to be, but there definitely is a lot of information, a lot of things to consider in this whole thing. It can definitely be overwhelming, but if you are going to go out there and tackle this on your own, just try to take it one step at a time. Don't rush in and try to do everything in 1 or 2 nights. Get the financials in order and then think about, hey, do you want to work with the broker? How do you want to go about all of that? If you are feeling overwhelmed, then that's definitely one of the reasons that we do recommend working with a broker. We wanted these podcasts to be educational and not just salesy. Obviously, we are brokers. We would love to earn anyone's business. And no matter which broker you choose, if you are feeling overwhelmed by this whole process, and especially if your website's over $100,000 valuation, definitely consider working with a broker and take that into consideration seriously.
All right. That's good feedback there. Appreciate that. Only last thing I'll say, I don't think Trey has any comments left here, so I'll leave you with one last thing. I think it's tough to think about this process and be like, oh, whoa, there's so many things to do, and what step goes where. Because one thing I would say is that a transaction is completely different, and it depends how the seller wants to run it, and it depends how the buyer wants to run it too. Some buyers aren't going to give you an LOI until they've gotten back-end access, etc. And so the process is really fluid. It depends on how you want to run it, but traditionally, the way I think about it is you need to gather all of your data. You need to get the business listed. Once it's listed, you need to get an offer. So you want to get an LOI. And you could also get an IOI, which is a softer form of an LOI. But you want to get a document like that from a buyer. You want to sign it together. Once that is signed, then you want to provide them additional access to the back end, etc., for them to confirm their interest in buying it. And then from there, you go ahead and handle getting an escrow set up and getting the transaction funded. And so it sounds, a little bit more manageable when you think about, okay, let's get to the time to list my business, and then let's get an LOI, information flow, escrow, closing process. And so that's kind of how I think of the process at a high level, and hope that's kind of helpful to go through that quickly, since 9 episodes is a lot to go through and not get a summarized outlook. So with that, we'll go ahead and let Trey wrap this one up.
All right, so to look forward to next episode, episode 10, the final episode of the How to Sell Your Online Business series. We have been getting quite a few questions coming from some of our listeners, and we really want to tackle those questions in the last episode, just answering all the questions that any listeners have had. It's going to be a lot more lackadaisical. It's not going to be very structured. We're just going to have some questions, some answers, and really go back and forth. So if you guys do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Our email is dealteam@saleaway.co. Again, that is dealteam@saleaway.co. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. This is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and YouTube. And we would really appreciate if you enjoyed the podcast, click that like button, subscribe button, or add our show to your favorites so you can be in the loop whenever we have more shows in the future. Roll the outro.